I've realized recently I spend a lot of time complaining about things I don't like. And I think today might be the day that I finally discuss something on this channel I do like. And that is German literature. I have a love for German literature, and I'm going to look at two people. I mean, one of them's Czech, but a lot of his work's in German. And that's Franz Kafka. And the other is so good that I remember his name, Friedrich Nietzsche. My favourite philosopher, personally. It's between him and Camus. But I think Friedrich Nietzsche just takes it. So why do I like these people so much? Well, they're both very similar in a lot of ways. See, while Nietzsche kind of strives in his first kind of famous works to really kind of uplift people, I think Kafka in a lot of ways does the complete opposite. And it's interesting the perspectives of why they do this. See, Kafka often portrays the world as a place where we're surrounded by things we can't control, higher powers that we will never be able to overcome. And we're kind of left to our own devices, our own suffering, and the human condition. Kafka's take on the human condition is really interesting. I'm just going to list off the famous works here because I don't want to get too deep into it. But Kafka, say for example, Metamorphosis, where a man turns into a bug and tries to support his family, who are all very overbearing, entitled, expecting things that he cannot deliver realistically. And now he's been turned into a bug. He goes to discuss with his boss, and he can't do his job, obviously, because he's a bug. Now, what is this enigmatic of? Well, it could be anything. That's down to the individual, to be honest, what it symbolizes. Personally, I think it could be, the struggles that we bring from outside work into work and how that affects us, the outside life, having to supply. And it's also good to know that Kafka himself was actually kind of seen as a disappointment by his father especially. His father informs a lot of his work. His father is the one that doesn't want him really to be a writer, which is why he only produced one piece while he was alive. And that doesn't actually do very well. It's only after he dies, a good friend of his publishes his work after being explicitly told to burn it after Kafka dies. Or on his deathbed, per se. He wouldn't tell him after he dies. Maybe he did. I don't know. But anyway, it was definitely while he was alive he told him to burn the works. And it's as a result of this that he doesn't listen, and we get Franz Kafka, who at the time wasn't huge, but 5, 6, 7, I'm going to sneeze, I'm so sorry. I'm not going to, I'm lying to you. I'm a liar. Anyway, he doesn't get famous while he's alive. It's actually after he dies he becomes more famous, and this is something that happens with Nietzsche too. Nietzsche's first work isn't hugely famous when he's alive. It's seen as very controversial, and because the way he writes, it was seen by a lot as kind of difficult to understand. And that is the thing about Nietzsche. He is severely misunderstood. And I don't mean in the kind of Linkin Park way. Bring me the horizon. Oh, no one understands me. I am meaning literally people didn't understand what he was writing. He wrote like a Greek or Roman philosopher. The grandeur of his words were kind of difficult to grasp for most people. Even myself reading it, I'd say I'm fairly well read. Even some of the stuff for me is like, what are you talking about? And this is before he goes like completely insane. So, yeah, you've got these two kind of pieces of work that are severely difficult to understand in a lot of ways, but also there's a level of simplicity to them. Now, Nietzsche's work is, the first piece of work at least, is so famous, and Gott ist tot is something that is said in his piece of work. And basically, God is dead. Now, at the time, this is outrageous for a lot of people, because despite the fact that atheism was around, he was a self-proclaimed atheist at that time, despite his father being a preacher, and him actually going to become a preacher at one point, but ends up dropping out of that school because he had problems with the administrators there. And he essentially says, no, I don't want to do this. I'm going to pursue my own world, my own life. And eventually comes to the conclusion that no, actually he doesn't believe in God anymore. Now, God is dead and we've killed him is one of those really famous sayings that is severely misunderstood. See, the point of this isn't to cause outrage, to startle atheists, or sorry, theists even. I myself am one. And his point is that authority figures are poisoning your brain. Authority figures are getting into your head and making you think certain things that you yourself may not value if you were not, say, I don't know, religious or politically charged in a certain way. He doesn't believe in this. He believes that God is dead, i.e., everything above you, every authority figure, is not got your best interests at heart. How I understand, personally as a theist, I don't believe that. I do believe in God. I think the morals of the Bible, or some of them, are things that I live by. Obviously, there are some that I reject. There are some that I, question. His point was, however, that ultimately we need to live for ourselves. We need to make mistakes, and we need to live as if we are going to live again and again and again and again. And each time we do things, we want to do it because it is the best thing for us. It will, provide ourselves with joy, and we will learn from our mistakes. We'll rise kind of every time you fall. And it is very hopeful for someone whose life was actually really upsetting. He loses his father at age 4, loses his younger brother at a similar time. His mother and sister depend on him throughout his entire childhood, basically, to be the man of the house. He's horrifically bullied, he struggles to make friends, and for most of his life, he is close to a failure besides anything other than academics. He gets, I believe it's syphilis on the first time he has sex in a brothel, which impacts him for the rest of his life. He works at a hospital, and contracts, I believe it's tuberculosis or some dysentery he contracts while working there, helping people. And it seems like he's being punished. And that is why he turns his back on God eventually, because he feels as if he's doing the right things and he keeps getting kicked back down. And so he comes to the conclusion that actually he has to self-motivate to rise back up. And in this way that kind of he rejects God, in the way that he feels kind of hopeful, is the same way that Kafka feels hopeless. Kafka feels as if almost his characters, all of them in his famous literature, kind of get trodden down by whatever it might be, whether it's a system, and it always feels as if it's systemic. It's something bigger than the individual. And both talk about this kind of bigger picture, whether it's directly or indirectly. Obviously, with Kafka, it's slightly less direct, it's more symbolic. But I think this is interesting. These are the two approaches I think that one can take in life in general, is the kind of no matter how good you are, no matter what you do, Kafka-esque, I guess, approach to it. Or in my opinion, that's what I get from Kafka, is kind of the hopelessness and the absurdity of life as a whole, the human condition. Whereas Nietzsche's is ultimately a lot more positive. It is, I know the word Übermensch has been completely bastardized by his sister, who basically rewrote a lot of his work during and after his passing. But that, as a theory, is actually really uplifting. It is learning from the mistakes, it's self-motivation, and it's ultimately finding your own way throughout the world in spite of authority figures. Now, I don't ultimately think that Nietzsche hates religion. I don't think he's actively pro-religion, because I think from his perspective, it's something, it's the opium of the masses almost, to quote Karl Marx. I think he's in a similar school of thought where he thinks that it is this thing that stops people from being authentic. It stops people from being able to kind of access themselves, improve themselves, because they're trying to appeal to something that they might not even wholeheartedly agree with. See, Nietzsche wants you to be you. He wants everyone to be individualistic, make mistakes, make changes, stand out, and also learn, ultimately, and then live a good life as a result of that. And that, for me, is something that I try to do. Now, do I do it with religious morals on the side? Yes, because I'm a Christian, and that's something that I fairly firmly believe in. I can do a completely separate video on that stuff if you're interested in my personal theological beliefs. But yeah, I really love that. It's interesting as well because these are two very, very different schools of thought when it comes to scrutiny. But I like them both, and that is why I really like German literature. So yeah, thank you for listening, and yeah, that was a yap fest and a half. So if any of that made sense to you, cheers. Hopefully I'll see you around, alright? What's that? Cheers.